Today on Drunk Ninja 101, I'm going to answer the question, how did I make this board? Literally the first step is to get your crazy out, because if you see here, I literally made a little hex jig, a single hex, and yes, I know a lot of people told me there's an easier way to do this, but this is, I'm just nuts, so this is what I did. So I started tracing out hexes on a piece of styrofoam insulation. That, by the way, you can see it's kind of dirty because I washed it up, because literally it was garbage. So after tracing out the hex grid, and I don't care that it's not perfect because I'm all about it being good enough. What I did then, I etched in with a X-Acto knife along the hexes, and then I took that little pen there that no longer had ink in it, and I chipped away a bunch of the foam haphazardly, and what that caused was a recessing in the surface of the foam to simulate the hexes. So why only make one when you can make four? Destroy your wrist for the future. You'll notice here that one of the sheets is actually pink. So I ran out of blue foam. So one of my friends, while I was at work, went and grabbed me a big sheet of pink foam from a local home hardware. What I did notice about this foam, it's more rigid, and so it doesn't line up with more fluffy blue foam. Moving forward, whenever I make more boards, working with this pink board was actually a lot more satisfying because, again, it's more rigid, so it's easier to cut, etc. Two things to note here. First, in the recesses of the hexes, before I did this black priming, what you see, I actually backfilled with a very light grit sand that I had kicking around. So what that did, it kind of roughed up the in-between of the hexes to make it look a little bit more natural than just like a cutout, rough shape divot that, I tore it with a pen. After that though, what you're seeing is black paint mixed with Mod Podge, and I use matte Mod Podge. So I mixed black paint with Mod Podge, and I coat the foam to give it kind of like this basic primer coat, but the Mod Podge actually stiffens up the foam, and it makes it a bit more rigid, and it'll protect it from damage, and it's a bit better to work with. So after the board dried, you want to give the Mod Podge definitely a solid night of drying. This step was simple. I literally just painted it brown with some random craft paint that kind of matches up with the next step that I will mention here in a second. To achieve the natural look to the ground, the product I used, it's made by a company called Vallejo, and the product is called European Thick Mud. It's a diorama texture. So to do all four boards with this texture, it took me about 1.5 pots of this mud, and you definitely want to let this dry for at least 24 hours. So to give the board a little bit of variation, I decided to use a secondary diorama texture. The one that I used is called Brown Thick Mud, and it's also done by Vallejo, and you can see that it just breaks up the ground a little bit, so everything's not the same color. After the textures were dry, I moved on to the next step that I wasn't sure about doing. So I decided to use a tan colored craft paint, and I dry brushed the board to catch all the high parts and make them pop a bit more. After I finished, I started panicking because I'm like, did I just ruin the diorama mud? But once I was finished and I started doing the next step, I felt a lot better about the way this looked. probably the most fun part of doing this, all these boards. This next step. I found some old blocks that someone gifted me, I want to say when I opened my game store up, maybe over 10 years ago now. I was just kicking around, hadn't used it. So I pulled that stuff out, and you can get blocking anywhere. One place I'd suggest would be your local game stores, but like Woodland Scenic, they make some really good products. Anyway, so I took 2 different color blocks, and I used one darker green for the majority of it, and I kind of like patched this out. I wanted it to look like broken ground. I didn't want it just like looking green and fuzzy everywhere, so you can actually see the mud. And then I applied this by like coating the board in watered down PVA glue, so literally like white glue that you would give a kid to bring to school. And while that was still wet, I sprinkled over sections with the other sort of lighter colored, very, very, very conservatively for this one, just to break up the grass. And once that part was done, I let it dry overnight. The next day I came into my shop and I took some more watered down PVA and I put it into a spray bottle and I soaked the whole thing. And then I let that dry for another day, just sealed down the top of the flocking, so you know we can play games on top of this. And I don't really have to worry about the grass just falling back off the top. And there you have it. That's how I made that grass board for my diorama BattleTech games. I think I'll probably end up trying to make more of these tutorial videos on how I slowly make my terrain. The next one I'll probably make is regarding the hills that you see in the picture that go on top. Those were a bit faster to do, and they were pretty fun as well. Some notes about the board. Some of the hexes don't line up when you line the boards up, but I mean, that's whatever. I know I rush things and I don't measure. I'm kind of like measure once, cut twice type of guy. But that's just personal preference. I'm sure that you guys out there will make a better product than me. Yeah, I hope you enjoyed this, and hopefully this was informative. And thanks for watching Drunk Ninja 101 and class dismissed.